70. The senator from District 12 in Mississippi and the chairman of the Senate Democratic Caucus, Senator Derrick Simmons. Chairman, thanks for taking the time to join us today. How you doing?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me, Dave.
Glad to have you. And I think the big question is, have there been any snowball fights over at the Capitol today? Do you know?
A lot of the members are slowly coming in. We don't start till 4 o'clock today. No, there have not been any snowball fights.
Day's not over, Chairman. I'm not going to be too hopeful until we get done with the proceedings today. Now, let's get right into the meat of the thing. Last Wednesday was there really aren't any terms for what happened last Wednesday that don't undersell it. I started to say it was an impactful event, but I think that undersells it itself. What are your thoughts on what happened last Wednesday and what they mean moving forward for the state of Mississippi in particular?
Well, Dave, last Wednesday, it was an insurrection. It was a criminal assault, and even now, a murder that took place at the People's Building. And so it's very, very concerning, not only here in Mississippi, but in America and even around the world. The world was watching America last Wednesday. And we need to do everything in our power now to reclaim our democracy and advance justice. And the way that we get past what happened last Wednesday, in my opinion, is to look at our leaders, our federal leaders, Roger Wicker and Congressman Thompson, who both seem to have indicated that they want to look forward to this new administration and to this new Congress. But to do that, we also need to hold all of those individuals accountable for what they did last Wednesday.
So I take that to mean you would be in support of the articles of impeachment they're talking about introducing in Congress in Washington.
Yeah, I believe that the insurrection was incited by an unstable U.S. president. Many Republican leaders, Ted Cruz, Lindsey Graham, Rubio, the list goes on and on. When we talk about Republican leaders who saw that Donald Trump was unfit for office. And I believe the events of last Wednesday were foreseeable. And it just was something about that it wasn't a matter of if it was going to happen. It was a matter of when. And so we saw it on last Wednesday.
Now, my question is, what is the difference between what happened last Wednesday, which was absolutely horrible, in my opinion? It was horrific, never should have happened. What's the difference in that and the riots we saw all summer long in just about every major city in America? But those were looked at through a different lens and were treated in a different way. What's the difference between the two?
Well, for anyone who would destroy property or commit any act of violence, there is no difference. However, when people exercise their First Amendment right, like many of the protesters did, black and white, young and old, after the killing of George Floyd last summer, they were peacefully protesting. And so I think that a distinction, or I know a distinction must be made between those who were exercising their constitutional First Amendment right versus those who actually will commit violence and destroy property. So I look at those individuals who destroyed property and committed acts of violence, totally different than the vast majority of those individuals who peacefully protest last summer. What we saw on Wednesday was a complete insurrection. It was not an exercise of the First Amendment right. It was basically to contest the fraud that was put on by this president about the election. And so they actually did the very undemocratic thing, and they were incited by the U.S. president and a lot of his enablers.
But that same thing, I think, would apply to the rally last Wednesday, because the vast majority of people that attended the rally did not go down to the Capitol building. So the same thing could be said. The majority of the people were exercising their First Amendment rights peacefully. just like over the summer when the majority of people were doing that. But still, we have news reports of buildings on fire and everything else. So I just worry that we're going to fall into the trap of having double standards in this situation because, again, not condoning what happened last Wednesday. Shouldn't have happened. Everybody needs to be prosecuted that was involved. Everybody that set foot inside the Capitol building needs to have serious repercussions brought against them. But it seems like we're painting with a broad brush this time, whereas before it was, now those are just the outliers. They're not the ones that are actually doing it. And that's what worries me because that doesn't help bring anybody together, I don't think, Chairman.
Well, I believe that we should treat any and all individuals who are violent or who destroy property, we should treat them all the same. And people who are exercising their First Amendment right, peacefully protesting, we should actually allow them to do that. I mean, it's constitutionally protected. But look at also the difference between last summer and on Wednesday. Last summer, we saw a military response. We saw troops actually being out while people were trying to exercise their constitutional right last summer. And I know you couldn't help but to recognize on Wednesday, I mean, there was an absolute police absence, and the few police officers at the Capitol Police who were there, there's an investigation on whether or not they were complicit. And so that's a distinction I think is very important to be made as well.
Well, and there are some questions that need to be answered there. You're correct. It just worries me because you know this just like I do, Mr. Chairman. We are living in a time of perception is everything. Everyone immediately forms a knee-jerk opinion and moves forward, and I just worry about the perception here and whether or not it's helping. And the same thing applies to the impeachment movement against President Trump. Is that going to make it better or worse?
Well, I think that the Congress has a job to do. I know he only has a number of days left before he has to leave, and they strongly believe. I know I've actually heard Speaker Nancy Pelosi say that they must act because they feel like if they fail to act, it's a dereliction of duty, and so that's the position that I know the House is taking. I have not heard anything from Leader McConnell or how he's going to respond to it, but I believe that based off what we saw on last Wednesday, we need to act in a way to show the world that we are taking this seriously and this should never happen again.
Now, let's move back into Mississippi just a bit, because that has been the thing that has taken over the conversation ever since last Wednesday, was what happened at the Capitol building. But kind of lost in the middle of that, we have a legislative session going on. You guys are dropping bills and getting ready to get into the business of the state of Mississippi. Just in general broad strokes, and if you can stick around after the break, because we're coming up on a break in a moment here, we can get into some specifics. But just in broad strokes, what do you see out of this legislative session here in Mississippi?
Well, Dave, we have one relief package that the Congress just passed right before the new year. And I'm quite sure with the new administration, it's going to be another COVID relief package. And so I can see first the legislature will have to act on those packages on getting the aid to Mississippians that desperately need it, whether it's rental assistance, whether it's more small business support, whether it's helping with food insecurity, all of those things that you saw the legislature act upon last summer and into the fall. We will certainly have to do that. We also passed the teacher pay raise bill last year. It was signed by 52 senators. We sent it over to the House, and because of the pandemic, the House was unable to take it up. I'm sure that we will see that being passed or certainly considered during this session. One thing I will say that I know Democrats care about, especially more now than ever, in light of this pandemic, is what are we going to do about the expanding access to health care?
Well, I tell you what,
Democrats
if you can hold that thought, we are up against the break. I want to talk about that. So if you can hold that thought, when we come back, we have Senator Derrick Simmons, chairman of the Senate Democratic Caucus in the Mississippi Legislature, and we'll continue there on the air on your local station and on SuperTalk TV, and joined by the chairman of the Senate Democratic Caucus, Senator Derrick Simmons. And Senator, I had to interrupt you because we were up against a break, didn't have a choice. You had just mentioned something about expanding health care, and forgive me, I'm going to call you out on something. You said at least Democrats care about that. I think everybody cares about getting good health care for Mississippians. It's just a disagreement on how to get there, I think.
Yes, sir. And I guess I need to clarify, Medicaid expansion, since it's being constitutional, it's been the law of the land declared by the U.S. Constitution in 2010. We have been certainly supporting and dropping bills to expand Medicaid. And of course, yes, there has been disagreement in that regard on how we get there. Now more than ever, it's very important that we do everything we can to make sure Mississippians have the health care coverage that they need. And so 300,000 Mississippians have been left behind because we have failed to expand Medicaid or expand access to health care. We want to call it that. We could have created some 9,000 plus new jobs, and we've lost roughly $1 billion a year for our failure to take advantage of that provision of the Affordable Care Act. And so it's my hope that in a very bipartisan way that we could reach some agreement just for the sake of those Mississippians who need access to health.
Now, again, though, the question comes back to, and we've talked about this before, where's the money come from? It's not free. Those doctors are still going to get paid somehow. And even if it's not now, then down the road, the bill's going to come due. How do we pay for that?
Well, for the first 3 years, if we would have done what we should have done, it was paid for 100% by the federal government. At no point in time will the state of Mississippi pay more than 10% of the cost. We're already getting 3-to-1 from the federal government now. I don't see a problem with taking 90%, $9 out of $10 from the federal government just to provide health care to Mississippians who need it. So I think that the money is going to come from the federal government. And our obligation will be paying 10% of it, which I think is the right thing to do when you look at the cost and benefit analysis of it.
Now, having said that is still 10% we'll have to come up with in our budget. So there will be some cost to the state of Mississippi, just not the full cost, not even the majority of the cost, nowhere close, but there will still be some cost. Will that require cuts in other areas to make up that difference in the budget?
I think that should go through the legislative process, Dave. It will be my hope that we, through that process, appropriation, we can see where the budget is. I know we are suffering a little because of the pandemic, and so we must recover from the coronavirus pandemic and also an economic one. So, yes, very, very well taken about the budget. But I do believe we can get there if Democrats and Republicans can work together with leadership on trying to figure out a way of how we can achieve this, because the benefits, I believe, far outweigh the costs. And I understand we have unlimited needs and wants and limited resources. I fully understand that. But I believe we can get there if we just all sit at the table and figure out the best way to get there.
Wanted to ask you about a couple of things in specific that you had already dropped, and one of them, Senate Bill 2164, and explain this to me, the official reasoning for it, your bill to remove marijuana from Schedule I drugs in the state of Mississippi. Would that just completely legalize it?
It would. And you see this all over the country, and you also will see, Dave, that there's federal legislation that probably is going to be considered and passed under this new administration. And so, the way I look at it, just like it was a time we had prohibition, and we made, at some point, the federal government and the states made a decision that all you need to do is legalize it, regulate it and tax it, and then everything would eventually work out for you. And so, just like we do alcohol now, we we pass laws every session regarding alcohol, whether we actually create recreational districts that allow alcohol. We got dry counties, wet counties. We consider legislation every year regarding alcohol, but you cannot deny the benefit of the state of Mississippi being able to regulate alcohol and also tax alcohol. So I believe we can do the same thing regarding marijuana.
Now, well, what would that do to Initiative 65 that happened last year if you got this through and it passed?
Well, Initiative 65 is in the Constitution. This bill will be in statute. And so Initiative 65 is for medical. It's for medical marijuana. And Initiative 65 does not speak to an outright legalization of marijuana. It just basically speaks to medical marijuana and providing it to those Mississippians who need it for those health related reasons. This will be an expansion of that, to answer your question, but it would be in statute. It wouldn't be in Constitution.
Now, let me ask you this. I know you've been talking it around and shopping it around a bit. Have you gotten any hint of any bipartisan support on this, or is this going to be one of those partisan issues when this comes up for a vote?
I would not even say it's a partisan issue, because I can see some Democrats may not agree with me on it. I just think the vast majority of Democrats agree. And you'll be surprised, Dave. I know some of my Republican friends who agree with me. So I don't think it's going to be just a partisan issue. The question is Mississippi, in light of all the other concerns that we are dealing with and issues we are dealing with, is it the right time to take this measure up? And that'll be up to our legislative leaders.
Now, having said that, I think there's one thing that's a bipartisan issue we can all agree on. Another bill that you have floated, Bill 2071. I think we all know what a plastic straw is. So I think we're good on that one, aren't we?
I think we should be good on that one.
But what's the purpose of that bill? What's the purpose of that?
Just basically just safety, sanitation. It's environmentally safe. It was certainly pushed by the National Conference of Environmental Legislators, and they've been pushing it for a while. And so it was a bill that I considered a number of years ago. I know it was also sponsored on the House side, and so it's my hope that we'll get some movement this year.
Yeah, I want to end on this. Yeah, no, go ahead.
Just encourage businesses, to provide straws to customers, so that they could actually use straws. It's just a sanitary thing. The majority of businesses already have it in their business practice that they do that.
Makes sense to me. Now, before we get out of here, because we are running out of time in this segment, and I know you've got stuff you've got to get to as well, but I just want to point something out here, because you just made the comment talking about the marijuana legislation that you've dropped, that bill that you've dropped, that you have some Democrats that disagree, some Republicans that agree with you on it. So it's kind of across the board. Just talk about this for a second, especially in light of the way things are in this country atmospherically at the moment. We've got to get back to that, where everybody sits down and just has a conversation about things instead of standing across the room and pointing fingers and screaming. We've been doing that for several years on both sides. Everybody's guilty of this. It's not just one group. We've got to get back to having conversations instead of shouting matches. Would you agree with that?
Dave, I agree 300%. I think Mississippi benefits, and we can consider and pass the best policy for all Mississippians when we are all sitting at the table, not shouting, not hollering, not being disrespectful, or even ignoring each other. When we can sit down together as Mississippians and bring all of our backgrounds, all of our experiences to try to come up with good policy. I think that's best for us.
And I would give as an example, Mr. Chairman, and I know you won't take this personally because you know how this is here between us. You've said some things I don't agree with. Period. Just end of discussion. But that's no need to devolve into shouting and name-calling and everything else. We disagree on some things. That's how we move forward, is to talk about them and find out where everybody stands. And I appreciate you coming in and taking the time to do that today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dave. The state will be a whole lot better. The country will be a whole lot better if we can agree to disagree and not be disagreeable.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Senator Derrick Simmons, chairman of the Senate Democratic Caucus, we appreciate it. Come back and talk to us again soon, sir.
Thank you.